Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for this session, which is going to be talking us through some of the changes that are being announced to electricity network charges. For the session today, we'll do a quick introduction, myself and some guest speakers that we've got, and then we'll look at which parts of the charges are going to change and why, importantly, and then we'll look into a bit more detail of when they'll be happening and what the sort of the new structure of these will look like, a view of how this the Co-op Power Consortium sites kind of fits into the new charges, a little bit more about what we'll be doing next, and then a Q&A session to start. It's a fairly, as with all things energy, there is usually quite a lot of acronyms and quite a lot of technicality, so we've tried to strip out most of those, but it's quite hard to generalise in these sort of things, so I know a lot of you may have questions once we've gone through the presentation, and we can hopefully ask those in more detail at the end. By way of introduction then, my name is Mike Mahoney. I'm the Energy Procurement and Risk Manager here at Co-op Power. I would have met quite a few of you, or you may have seen some of the market reports, things that I send out. And I'm joined today by two guest speakers from our supplier, Scottish Power, which is Mike Forber and David Dalrymple, who've kindly agreed to kind of join us and share some of their expertise and knowledge of the changes. So it's quite technical, and I wouldn't be able to give you the kind of information myself. So I'm very pleased that sort of David and Mike can join us there. I'll be handing over to them a little later in the presentation, so I'm sure you're both ready when we get there. Okay, if anyone's got any questions, by the way, if you want to pop those into the chat, Danny and the guys from Co-op Power will be kind of monitoring those, and so we'll try and come to those towards the end. So we'll go through the presentation, and so I think we've got plenty of time to hopefully answer as many questions as we can. So in terms of what the session is about and the changes that are coming, and actually should say, I think we're about to have a thunderstorm here in Stockport, so if you hear any loud bangs, it isn't my boiler exploding or anything like that, so it should be all right. So the reason we're here today is a fairly long-running saga in terms of changes to the distribution and transmission charges, which form part of the electricity bill. This was a process kicked off by Ofgem back in, I think, around about 2017, as they were seeing what they saw as problems with the way that particular part of the charging mechanism was operating. It's taken a fairly long time to get to this point, and as we'll see, it's still not quite finalised, as some of the changes will be taking even longer to implement than previously planned. So essentially, transmission distribution, this is the cost of the national grid and the local distribution networks, and across the country, this accounts for about £8 billion in total. And what is changing here is not the amount that's being charged, but just the way it's collected and who from. So yeah, we're looking at broadly 22% of the total cost that's kind of under consideration here. They do vary regionally, so the actual proportion might be slightly more or less depending on which part of the country your businesses are situated in. Now, the reason that this change is being implemented is really all about the development of the way the electricity market has been changing in recent years. The distribution networks are all highly regulated. They have certain amounts of revenue they're allowed to recover every year, and if they have a 1 year when they over recover, they have to give that money back. If they have a year when they under recover, they can get it. They can increase their charges the next year. So they're fairly, in terms of the money they earn, they're fairly consistent businesses, which is why so many of them are kind of owned by pension funds and things. But what's been happening in the UK is that we've been seeing end users increasingly turning to load shifting or demand side response in order to reduce their energy costs, and we've seen a huge increase in the amount of embedded generation or distributed generation, which is mainly renewable, wind and solar, either on site or just directly connected to the local networks. And these companies, these things actually avoid. They don't have to pay the network charges. And so in terms of the networks allowed revenues, they reduced because of the demand side response and generation. But they still have to recover the same amount of money, so the charges go up for everyone else. And over the years, as the ability for end users to manage their usage and the greatly increasing capacity of renewable generation on these local networks, the charges for those that don't have their own generation or are less able to manipulate the load have been increasing, and this was really distorting the market. So Ofgem felt it really did need to act now and change the way that the charges are applied. I'm going to hand over to Scottish Power now, just as well, because you probably hear the hailstones hammering down outside. So I think David's going to kind of pick up and give you a bit more detail into exactly what is happening with the charges and when. So I'll hand over to you, David, if that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. As Mike said at the start, I'll probably try and keep some of these changes quite high level at this stage, and then once we get into the Q&A, we can go into more detailed sections as required. So in terms of what's changing and when, the first point to note is that National Grid have introduced a new banding system, and this is essentially to support the objective of this change to introduce greater fairness in charging. The bandings will sit beneath the current voltage types, and there'll be 4 bandings with beneath that. The bandings work 1 to 4, with 4 naturally being the sort of higher charges. On a later slide, we've got some information on how those bandings are set, and the timing of those bandings in terms of allocation was last year, as when National Grid took a cut of the UK and determined which band everybody falls into. In terms of the actual changes to the charging structures for distribution transmission charges, I'll say apologies in advance for those of you that are really familiar with distribution and transmission charges, but I'll just recap how they work just for a bit of context in terms of changes. So distribution charges at the moment are charged on the basis of a standing charge, a capacity charge where applicable, and red, amber, green charging, which relates to your demand and when that demand's used. Now, the good thing with distribution charges are that's not changing as such. That structure still remains true. What the operators are doing effectively is recovering more of their costs via that standing charge element rather than the unit rates, which brings with it, I suppose, a couple of key considerations. So for your typical end user, you've probably got a bit more cost certainty there because you know what you're going to pay, and it's going to be less linked to your consumption. At the other end of the spectrum, which again I think Mike referred to, those customers that maybe take part in demand management to avoid costs, that opportunity is greatly reduced. The changes for the distribution charges are due to take place on the 1st of April 2022. The second part of this is a change to transmission charges, which arguably is a bigger change, but comes in a little later down the line. So again, just to touch on how transmission charges work at the moment. So as it stands for half-hourly style meters, the transmission charges that you pay is linked to your contribution to the UK's peak demand. So whenever the UK hits its peak, which is typically winter time between kind of 4 and 7 on a weekday, whatever you're consuming during that period is effectively what you pay for. So the change sees most of the areas of the country move away from that system and move to a single standing charge, an annual standing charge that will be published. There's a handful of areas that will retain the legacy peak charging system. However, proportionally it's really small in comparison to the standing charge. It's effectively all moving to a fixed charge mechanism. So again, as I said, with distribution, this brings with it, on one hand, cost certainty, but on the other hand, removes all opportunity to avoid these charges. There's no getting away from it. As I mentioned as well, that the change to transmission charges has been delayed slightly. So the original intention of Ofgem was to introduce all of this on the 1st of April 2022. However, they issued a publication a few weeks back to say that they're minded to delay the transmission change until April 23. And certainly all the indications we're getting are that will become confirmed soon, that will move to 2023. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Mike. Okay, so here we've just got a high-level summary of the changes and some of the impacts. I should say, in terms of the sort of red, amber, green diagram, this is quite a generic view. There'll always be outliers depending on a customer's demand and when they use. But typically, what we've seen is for transmission charges, for half-hourly, for those customers that are band 4, they're typically going to see a higher cost impact than the non-half-hourly style customers who sit at that sort of lower end of the spectrum. Yeah, so this table gives you a sort of broad indication of where the high impacts are. Now, when we later on in the presentation, I think Mike's got a diagram showing how the portfolio chops up across those bandings, and hopefully most of you will be glad to hear that you probably fall in the amber and green and less so in the red, which is good in respect to this change. In terms of the bandings that I spoke about earlier, the bottom two tables just outline the thresholds that National Grid have set. So just to summarise, for non-half-hourly sites, the bandings are determined by a customer's annual consumption. So there's a kilowatt-hour demand, and you've got a lower and upper threshold that determine what band you sit into. On the half-hourly side, slightly more complicated in as much as it's split into voltage type. So you've got low voltage, high voltage, and extra high voltage. But again, the bandings are determined by what that site's authorised supply capacity is. And again, just as a reminder, and apologies for everyone who's fully aware of what that means, is the authorised supply capacity is what you agree with the distribution network operator in terms of what you take off their network at a given time. So that's all existing, if you like, terminology and mechanisms. I guess the change is to using that authorised supply capacity to determine a customer's banding. So I think the intention is, Mike, to leave people with this pack so that they can see where they would sit within the bandings and see where the thresholds are. I think at this point I'm going to probably pass back to the two mics to look at how the portfolio sits across the bandings.
Thank you very much, David. Mike, did you have anything to add on that, Mike Forber?
No, I think happy to move on to the next slide, Mike, and just have a look, as David said, how some of those actual sites, on what categories they fall into.
Okey-dokey. So what we have here is we've taken the all of the sites under the consortium, that's all the co-op group sites and all of the co-op power customers, and all of your sites, and map these into the bandings, and just kind of shown the relative proportions of them here. So far we've done this for just over 8,500 sites and meters. We have a few more to go, but this is the vast majority of all of the premises. Starting at the top, you can see the non-half hourly, so it's low voltage, no maximum import capacity. There's a relatively even spread of sites and meters across the four bands. Actually increasing as we up got the volume, but a fairly even spread. We come down into the half hourly, the first bar there, which is the LV, and again you'll see a lot of them as a band 4. These are mainly the non-half hourly meters that now have the P272, so they're kind of half hourly, the smart metering, etc. that's gone on there. So they have half hourly data, but they're not yet fully half hourly settled. I wouldn't have the capacity assigned the way that a half hourly meter would do. And then moving on to the kind of biggest block of light, which is the kind of low voltage half hourly sites. Again, you see there's the weighting there is far more into bands 1 and 2, which is again broadly what we expect given the kind of nature of most of the businesses within the consortium. We have relatively few high voltage sites. Some of those will actually be co-op group depots, etc. And there's only one site in the extra high voltage band, which I believe is probably Angel Square Co-op HQ. So across the portfolio, you can see most of the sites are kind of in this kind of bands 1 and 2, save for the P272 ones, which referring back to the kind of grid that David showed there, means that we're kind of in the mix, really, that we're not on the extremes of where the cost impact may or may not be on that. So at the moment, so we're going through working out the various changes to the costs. It's fairly complicated. Particularly actually given last year, considering how there was so much volume disruption during the lockdowns, in trying to work out whether we may be paying slightly more or slightly less on a site-by-site basis. It will very much depend on just the location, which band you're in, and also the consumption profile of the site. So Co-op Power and Scottish Power kind of working through that information now to try and get the details right. It's very difficult to generalize, unfortunately. I can't say it's about a 3% increase or a 3% decrease in general, because it does very much depend on the circumstances at each site and the kind of spread of sites that you may have within your business. Just so to that end, then, so the main purpose here today is to sort of let you know what the changes are doing. But we're doing the analysis of the exact cost changes in the background. And so we expect to have completed that for the half-hourly suppliers by the end of this month. And what we'll be doing from Co-op Power is providing each of our customers individually with the sort of details about how their portfolios are impacted, and that will likely come from your customer relationship manager. So that'll be kind of Martin and Joe and Claire will be in touch to sort of go through that with you specifically. We are from that we'll then be doing the non-half-hourly suppliers, and that'll be about a month later. So again, about the end of next month, we should be in a position to kind of fully understand what that means for each site, for each customer. And again, we'll be kind of providing you with the detailed information about your portfolio at that point. Now, as David said, the triad charges, transmission charges, are also changing. That change has been put back, delayed by 12 months, and there's some doubts now about exactly what it will look like. I think Ofgem while the consultation isn't completely open, we don't expect major changes. There is some doubt about exactly what will be happening. So we should know the triad rates. Now the triad is going to be in place this year. So for those of you that were looking to that have been able to avoid triads in the past, that kind of that option is still open to you. So we'll know what the new rates will be imminently. Really, I think Grid should be publishing those very soon. And as soon as we get a steer from Ofgem based on what they're intending to do with transmission charges, I think we'll sort of set up a session there to explain those and help people understand what that will mean. Don't have a date for that yet. Hopefully it won't be too long, but given the kind of history of this already, it probably isn't worth holding your breath for a final decision to come through. But I say, as soon as it's there, we will be in touch and we'll try to understand that and say explain what it means for everyone's businesses and their costs overall. Okay. So that brings us to the end of the slide presentation, which I hope that was useful, and I think we'll open it up now to any questions people may have, and myself, David and Mike will do our best to answer them for you.
So there's just been a question in the chat from Greg Wilkins, which is a really good question. I think you touched on it, but if there's any more detail either you, Mike, or David from Scottish Power can provide. So the question is, will Co-op Power inform us of our bandings per site, and what are the expected timing of the banding comms? So I think you probably touched on the latter, but maybe just a bit more detail on if the level of detail will be per site.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we're going down to site level, so we'll be able to, show your entire portfolio and which kind of category it falls into, HV, LV, half hourly, non-half hourly, and which banding that is in as well. And we should be able to kind of show what your typical distribution charges have been over the last few years and what they will be in the future.
Well, thanks, Mike.
Yeah. And I think, so we've certainly with the half hourly, possibly even non-half hourly, we may be able to let you know in the next couple of weeks, kind of early June, we should be able to start getting some of that detailed site information over to you.
So we've got another question. What are the implications of DUOS moving from a mainly usage-based charge to a fixed/standing basis?
Thank you, Martin. Yeah. The part of the difficulty in bringing these charges through was how to get this balance between charging fairly, but also encouraging energy efficiency So at the moment, if you're familiar with your distribution charges, you'll know you've got these kind of red, amber, green charges. So kind of the red band are very high charges for when demand is high on the network, and if you're able to reduce your load during those times, you can save can make considerable saving. So that kind of time of use structure was very helpful to organisations looking to reduce demand or move it at different times of the day when there was kind of less pressure on the networks. The red, amber, green charge will still be there, but they're going to account for a much smaller, almost negligible part of the overall cost. And instead, you're now moving to essentially a standing charge basis. And so, if you are reducing your demand, the cost saving will be less because you still have to pay the same amount for your distribution charges. Whereas at the moment, and certainly for many of us last year, when demand reduced in the lockdown, your distribution, the cost of your distribution, use of the distribution system also reduced. So that now won't happen. But conversely, if you are increasing your demand, your cost won't go up as much as it would have done, because again, that standing charge, that there's a standing charge, that's a fixed amount. So it does it quite fundamentally changes the nature of the way the charges are made, but it does also mean that they will probably be more stable year on year. So as I mentioned at the start, the networks are regulated businesses. They're allowed to earn a certain amount of revenue every year, and if for whatever reason that they have a shortfall, they can increase their charges the following year to make that up. So what I like to see now is those forecast costs. They always provide a 5-year kind of forecast of charges. They're likely to be more accurate. So there's a degree of extra price certainty in the network charges in the future.
Cool. Just before I move on to the next question, David or Mike number 2, have you got anything else to add to those questions so far?
Yes, it's David here. I think as Mike said, it changes the dynamic of avoiding peak times, because effectively the industry is removing those cost signals that incentivizes people to move away and remove stress events on the grid. I guess the only thing I would add is for those customers who don't actively demand manage, for whatever reason, because they can't, the implication for them, I guess it really depends on the relationship between where their authorised supply capacity is set and how much demand they have. And what I mean by that is if you've got quite a small demand, but when you do turn on, you use a lot, so your capacity is high, then potentially you're going to see quite a big increase, because your standing charge is going to reflect that. Whereas if your demand's smoothed more, you're going to see less, which I guess kind of echoes the point that Mike made, that this is why it's impossible to give a sort of generic percentage impact, because it's such a mixed bag in terms of analysis we can see. So I guess just to add that point for those customers who don't demand manage, as I say, it just really depends on that relationship between capacity and consumption. Would be the only point I would add. Thanks.
Great. So I guess that big question of how does it affect my particular business? If anyone's sat there thinking that, I'd just refer back to what Mike said about the end of May and end of June. We as Co-op Power are going to be coming back and kind of having those deep dive conversations with you, rather than trying to do it all our customers on one call. So Alan's got a question which is going to test my use of acronyms here. So with the delay to 2023, will the banding be reviewed again as sites authorised supply capacity, I hope I've got that right, may change during that period, and then they may sit and want to sit in another band. Many sites have higher authorised supply capacity than required.
Okay, do you want me to take that one, Mike, to start?
Yeah, if that's okay, David, please.
Yeah. And just, I suppose, to say firstly, it's a really good question, and it's a question that we're asking the industry ourselves. You know, given the delay, what will they do? But also, you know, how will they review it regularly as well? So at the moment, what's been issued by National Grid is a list of all the sites in the UK and what banding has been allocated. And as I said earlier, that was set at a time last year. But as you know, and as you're alluding to, that's only correct as of one day. Things move on. So, and I should add that the list that's came out isn't complete either. We've seen instances where the site's missing, and we've had to make an assumption on what their banding will be. So these are questions we have played back to the industry, and we're actually waiting for response on. What I'm hopeful of is when that minded to position to delay gets firmed up, I would hope that would trigger some further clarity as to what that means. But I would suspect that it will have a change to charging, you know, and the sheer fact that they've delayed it 12 months. In terms of any customers looking to change their authorised supply capacity, so business as usual, that's dealt with directly with the network operator, because it's only them that can agree that. However, what we do know is that Ofgem have created an appeals process for those customers looking to change their authorised supply capacity and potentially change their banding, which, as you can imagine, is obviously to stop a run on everybody looking to change their banding, which ultimately would change their whole cost model. I think there's been some legal text produced in terms of that appeal process, but again, there's probably a number of clarifications we're still waiting on from Ofgem as to how that would work. I don't know if that's fair to say, Mike, in terms of your understanding as well.
That's right. Yeah, the mechanism to get your capacity changed isn't clear at all at the moment, and I think you're right. Ofgem probably quite deliberately made it as invisible as possible, because they would be expecting any surge of people, businesses, saying, well, I should be, on a different band, etc. So that, I think in terms of the question, they may be reviewed again, and I think as they go through the process, so there are some sites which are missing, and the networks will be kind of making sure they've got the data correctly, because they need to be able to charge their customers correctly. So that information should update, and hopefully as we get closer to the time, it will become clearer exactly what you are supposed to do. You would have to go through at the moment, it has to be done through the local distribution network, and they've always been not particularly customer facing, if you like. That's where your homes and businesses are connected to, but the industry model is to everything go through the supplier. But this is one particular thing which might need the networks to be start to be more kind of accessible and open to the public and businesses, as we try to make sure people are charged the right amount. But so at the moment, it's not clear at all how you make this happen.
So, does this affect all businesses, regardless of size? And is there anything businesses can do to get around these changes or bandings, or will this effectively become the new norm
Yes, it's a nationwide change, so all businesses will kind of be charged on this basis. So this is the charging model from April for the future. Again, depending on, I think that the capacity is an interesting one. There is, because of the the electrification of transport and heat network capacity is becoming an issue. It has been for a while, actually. If you want to add extra capacity in new buildings and things, it's always been difficult to to get the network to do that. So I think they should be happy if people want to reduce their capacity, but because they need to free it up for somewhere else. But again, business needs to be aware of what capacity they need to operate. So if you've given up capacity and then you want to expand, increase your demand for whatever reason, you might find it's hard to get it back again. So it's not a case of always taking it right back to what you think the minimum should be, because it can limit your ability to change in the future. Yeah, there's a balancing act really to be had there about what demand do you need for your business.
Thanks, Mike. We've got a good question from Martin. What will happen if I am currently on a fixed price contract?
Yeah. So if your contract goes beyond next April, you won't see any charge. Assume you're kind of on a fully fixed contract. You won't see any change until you come to contract renewal. So your supplier shouldn't be changing your rates halfway through, just because when you fix the contract, you're essentially saying this is what I tend to pay, and your supplier is sort of forecasted the price of distribution, transmission, etc. into those rates. So no immediate change. If your contract start date is kind of October 22, at that point you will see the different charges reflected in your pricing.
And is there anything that customers need to do or be thinking about this year, or is it a case that we will inform them of the changes on their banding, and as and when new information comes out, we'll be sharing that? So just is there any action required of customers at this stage?
No action really. So we'll be sharing the results analysis with customers. I think if there is any kind of anomalies at that point, then we can think about which steps to take. But yeah, but so once what we'll be in touch with the information. As I said, the majority of the sites appear to be fairly well situated within the kind of 1 and 2 bandings. Yeah.
Okay. A question from Greg. Will future forward fixed contracts have this change priced in now?
Yes, I think a simple answer, David, and Mike can confirm that from Troy Power.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I can probably chip in there. Yeah, we are pricing. The challenge being we're pricing to the as at now position, which is, as we know, has changed recently and could change again. So I guess we've got to be slightly reactive to that. But yes, we're pricing based on the best information we have available today, if that sums it up best.
Brilliant, thanks for that. If anyone else has got any questions, please pop them in the chat. Equally, I know usually when I attend a webinar, I always think of the question I should have asked once I've left. So if you have got any questions, just raise it with your customer relationship manager. And as Mike said, end of May, we'll be getting in touch with some analysis for the half-hourly sites, and end of June for the non-half-hourly sites. So, Mike, David, have you got anything else to add?
Not for me, no. Thank you. No, thank you for your time this morning. No.
Well, thanks, David and Mike, for joining us and for helping out with this one. Really appreciate that. Thank you. But yeah, nothing else to add for me. But say, we're kind of here for any questions anyone might have. So yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for your time. You've got 15 minutes back. Have a great day.